On episode 685 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Robert Lufkin and discuss his book, Lies I Taught in Medical School: How Conventional Medicine is Making You Sicker and What You Can Do to Save Your Own Life. Welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, the largest and longest running health and fitness podcast dedicated to people over 40. Whether you're looking to lose weight, get stronger, or improve your health and age better, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Coach Allen, an online health and fitness coach and author of The Wellness Roadmap. Each week, we dive into practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and fitness. If you're ready to look, feel, and perform your best, no matter your age, this podcast is the perfect place to start. Let's get you on the path to a healthier, fitter, and more energetic version of yourself. I hope you'll join us each week, and together we can unlock your full potential. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I'm really excited to share this interview with Dr. Robert Lufkin today. His book, Lies I Taught in Medical School, is wonderful. It's easily the best health and fitness book I've read this year and probably will remain so for quite some time. It's excellent, and I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. I'm also really excited about a new project I'm planning. I can't really go into it too much, but I do want to let you know to keep listening. Stay tuned to this podcast because this thing is going to be a game changer. I'm really, really excited about what I'm creating right now. And so, stay tuned because this is going to be good. Our guest today has served as a full professor at both the UCLA and USC schools of medicine. In addition to being a practicing physician, he is the author of more than 200 peer-reviewed scientific papers and 14 books that are available in 6 languages. Among his many inventions, including several patents in artificial intelligence, he developed an MR-compatible biopsy needle, which is used worldwide today as the Lufkin needle. With no further ado, here's Dr. Robert Lufkin. Dr. Lufkin, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Hey, Alan, please call me Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Okay, that's going to be hard because after reading your book, I'm like, this guy knows a thing or two. He's probably the smartest doctor, even the smartest doctor I've ever met, let alone person. But the book is called Lies I Taught in Medical School: How Conventional Medicine is Making You Sicker and What You Can Do to Save Your Own Life. You have some history with this because you were the doctor teaching this stuff, and you were getting sicker and sicker.
Yeah, I mean, the book is critical of so-called Western medicine or allopathic medicine, but I have to say, I'm part of the problem. I'm a medical school professor. I teach Western style medicine, and even though the book is critical of Western medicine, I haven't quit my job yet. I haven't been fired, at least last time I checked. And I have to say, if I get hit by a car out in front of my house, I'm going to want to have Western medicine. I want that blood transfusion. I want that, surgery to remove my spleen and fix my bones and all that. And Western medicine in the 20th century, those of us who were alive back then, it was truly transformative. The pills and surgeries that were developed by Western medicine in the 20th century transformed the lives of everyone in the world, largely through public health measures and infectious disease elimination or control. But it really was magical what happened. And the problem is, and that's what this book is about, is in the 21st century, we're facing literally a tsunami of so-called chronic diseases. And these diseases were present in the 20th century, but nowhere near in the biblical numbers anywhere in history compared to what we're seeing in the 21st century. And by chronic diseases, I mean everything from obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, mental illness, hypertension. There's a whole list of them. And when Western medicine takes the pills and surgeries that were so effective in the 20th century and says, hey, we'll just use this for these chronic diseases. They work to control the symptoms in many cases, but in most cases, they don't control the underlying root cause, so to speak. And these diseases continue to progress. And that's really the problem.
Well, we as consumers have to take some of the blame ourselves because we've gotten into this habit of believing, well, I go to the doctor, tell him what's wrong, he writes me a prescription, and I feel better because I want to feel better soon, if not already. And so we go in with the expectation that if he doesn't write me a prescription, well, the doctor hasn't done his job. Unless a broken arm, obviously set the arm or something. But if you get hit by a car, I think there needs to be an investigation because you have to have a lot of people thinking because the whole process of a pill for a problem or a surgery for a problem, it's driven by the system. And I'm a big fan of systems. I was an auditor in my previous life, so I believe you have to have standards and processes, and you have to follow them so that basically there's rules. But in many ways, those rules now have become like hand ties. I mean, there's limits to what a doctor can actually say and do. So talk a little bit about that because it's an industry-wide problem with the consumer being a contributing member of this whole thing. But why are there lies and why are there all these misunderstandings? And, because it's, I don't even want to get into COVID, but that's where it kind of culminated with basically a shot or a pill for a problem.
Yeah, and that's a great point you make, Alan. That it's not totally the doctor's fault. It's my fault as a patient too. In other words, the doctors prescribe pills and surgeries, but the patient would rather have a quick pill and a surgery because a pill just is something I do for 30 seconds once a day. Or a surgery even, I might take a week off of work, but then I go back to my regular lifestyle. And the message of the book and the real wake-up call for me that I wasn't aware of was that these chronic diseases where the pills and surgeries don't work, the obvious question is what does work? Well, there is no pill or surgery to get at these root causes, but what it is something even more powerful. It's something called lifestyle. And, everybody agrees we should have a good lifestyle. The question is, what does that mean? And that's what we get into. But the point about a doctor prescribing a pill, if I go to my doctor, I'd much rather have a pill as a solution, assuming it works, which they don't for the underlying root cause in many cases. But I'd much rather have a pill than get a lecture about, when I should eat and exercise and sleep, because that's what lifestyle goes down to. And I mean, the doctor can't do lifestyle for me. Lifestyle is something I have to do. The doctor just manages pills and surgeries, and they can give suggestions. But that was a real wake-up call too, that our Western medicine system, even though I'm a doctor, I used to think that disease started when the doctor diagnoses it, right?
Yeah.
I go and see my doctor and he goes, you don't have any diseases. I come back a year later and he goes, oh, you've got diabetes now. And I didn't have it a year ago, but I have it now. And that's what happens. As we get older, we get more and more of these diseases, or, oh, you forgot your keys. You have Alzheimer's disease, or, or you did, you have a lump, you have cancer. And I'm not making light of any of these very serious conditions that most of us, most adults have at least one of these, and all of us will likely die of one of them statistically, because these are the big killers there. But the point is that, the medical system is set up with certain diagnostic criteria. When your blood markers, your hemoglobin A1C for diabetes, let's say, goes above a certain level, then you have diabetes and the insurance kicks in and they can start charging and, writing prescriptions and billing for services. But before that, you don't have diabetes. A week before, you don't. And I realized that that's really not the way it works with these chronic diseases. And the thing I didn't realize, and many of my colleagues still don't realize, is these diseases begin years to decades before the doctor diagnoses them. So what does that mean? It means if I wait until the doctor tells me, I have type 2 diabetes, or I have Alzheimer's, or I have cancer, or I have any of these things, I've missed an opportunity, perhaps a decades long opportunity for prevention, because the diseases they're all there bubbling away. We're all going to get one of these diseases. As Jim Morrison says, nobody gets out alive, right? So the point is we want to push them back as late as we can in our life, but the opportunity, if I wait until the doctor diagnoses these diseases, I miss a tremendous opportunity for prevention. And the way prevention works is by changing our lifestyle. I have friends and colleagues who say, hey, I don't have any disease. I don't take any prescriptions. I'm not going to change my lifestyle. Well, actually, we're all on the path to getting one of these diseases. And we should all, I believe, change our lifestyle now. And the fascinating thing is that blew me away, I wasn't aware of, the same lifestyle things I do to lower my risk of obesity or diabetes or high blood pressure are the same things that lower my risk of Alzheimer's disease and cancer and mental illness and heart attack and stroke, all the things. It's the same metabolic health model that lifestyle can do. And it was just a wake-up call. And what got me interested, I was minding my own business. I'd like to say, hey, I did this because I want to make the world a better place. But no, not really. I came down with 4 of these diseases myself. I mean, I do want to make the world a better place, but that wasn't the motivation for me. I came down with 4 of these diseases myself, unexpectedly. And 4 of these chronic diseases, I went to my doctor. They prescribed 4 different drugs for each disease. And, I said, wow, is there anything else I should be doing, like lifestyle? What about that? And he goes, nah, that really doesn't work. You're going to be on these pills for the rest of your life, so you better get used to it. And at that point, it forced me to really dive deeply out of self-interest, really, because I had 2 young kids at school and, I wanted to live to see them. And I realized in this research that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and research that's been done that I wasn't aware of and that many of my colleagues still aren't aware of, that says that lifestyle can decrease our risk of disease and actually reverse these diseases in some cases. So I made relatively minor changes in my own lifestyle, and guess what? Went back to see the doctor and they couldn't believe it. They thought the labs were broken. Basically, I got off all 4 medications, and now I've made it my mission to help others take back their health and hopefully not make the same mistakes that I did.
So let's dive in a little bit, because I agree that the string of metabolism that you tied through all of these was actually quite fascinating. When we say metabolism, what are we really talking about inside the body and with what we eat and all of that? How does all this kind of work and tie in?
Yeah, at a basic level, I mean, when I went to medical school, metabolism was, eating food and digesting the food to make energy for the body. And now today, our knowledge is much, much deeper of it. It involves specific organelles in the cells called mitochondria, which drive our energy metabolism. But it does much more. It's related to things like insulin resistance and the way hormones manage sugars in our body and fat deposition. It's also related to inflammation, especially chronic inflammation, which drives all these chronic diseases and aging itself. And then finally, oxidation. It's related to that too. But this metabolic dysfunction is at the root cause of all these chronic diseases. And it's something that we address with these lifestyle changes, and we can really make a difference.
So you'll hear the conversation quite often, but even in the field of personal training, because personal trainers love this. A calorie is a calorie. So if you burn a calorie, that's good. As long as you're burning more calories than you're eating, you won't gain weight. You'll be fine. And food is food. Um, Both of those statements I know are inherently false, but they sound reasonable. Why would one calorie be different from another? And if all this is about energy metabolism, then sugar shouldn't be any different than protein, or a processed cracker shouldn't be any different than an apple. So what's going on there?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the lie that is still taught to overweight people, and let's face it, today in America, most adults are either obese or overweight. So it's something that the majority of people face. And the advice that's given to them is just what you said, eat less, exercise more. A calorie is a calorie, just eat fewer calories. Well, exercising, we know, doesn't work, because how do you work up an appetite? You exercise to work up an appetite. And well, I'll exercise to burn off the calories. Well, that really doesn't work either. If I go to Starbucks and have a muffin that has 500 calories, I'm going to be running the rest of the day to burn off 500 calories. It just, the math doesn't work. But to your point, are all calories equal? No, they're not. The three macronutrients, the major food types that your audience is probably heard of, is fat and protein, which are the essential ones. We die if we don't eat certain amounts of fat and protein. They have little effect on this primary hormone called insulin, which causes us to store fat. So eating fat really doesn't cause us to store fat, or eating protein doesn't cause us to store fat. But the third food group, so-called carbohydrates, which contain sugars and starches, rice, flour, this kind of thing, this disproportionately stimulates insulin. And insulin is the hormone that tells us to store fat. So eating fat doesn't make us fat, but eating carbohydrates do. And this storing fat and also increasing blood sugar, which is what carbohydrates do through insulin, drives metabolic dysfunction. So all the chronic diseases are driven by carbohydrate ingestion, leading to insulin spikes, leading to glucose spikes. And so that would tell us that maybe 100 calories of fat or protein is different than 100 calories of carbohydrates. And we know that to be true. If I eat 100 calories of potato chips, it's going to stimulate my insulin. It'll be stored as fat, and I'll be hungry again because I wasn't able to burn it for energy. It was stored as fat. On the other hand, if I eat 100 calories of hard-boiled eggs, it's mainly protein and fat. There are very few carbs in hard-boiled eggs, and that goes to energy. So my body burns them up. I'm not hungry. That's why most people can eat an egg without feeling a compulsion to eat the rest of the dozen, whereas very few human beings can eat one potato chip without consuming the whole bag. I know I can't.
Yeah, and kind of interesting thing is, as I think through this, is that insulin in and of itself is not a bad hormone. It's actually a very important hormone, because it does a lot of important things. It also shuttles energy to the muscles and the liver, which we need to basically, that's our gas tank, if you will. And then we have this extra tank called body fat that will store any additional. But the concept I think most people forget is that we don't need that much, or really any, carbohydrates to fuel our body. We only have, what is, I think is, you said 4 teaspoons of sugar, glucose in our blood at any point in time. And it's actually quite dangerous for us to have spikes in blood sugar. Number one, the brain doesn't like it. Number two, the kidneys don't like it. But we'll down a Coca-Cola that basically has multiple tablespoons. And so I think that's the point that I want people to kind of take away here is, we're not saying that insulin's bad. We're just saying if it continually gets stimulated because we're overeating the carbohydrates, and we don't even know it, because the potato chip also has a lot of fat, and it also has really quick in your bloodstream effects on blood sugar.
Yeah, I mean, insulin is life saving. We would all die without insulin very quickly. So insulin is required for life. But like you say, Alan, insulin protects us from glucose spikes in our bloodstream. In other words, high amounts of glucose. Why would we want to be protected from glucose? Because high levels of glucose cause something called glycation. It's a damage that the hemoglobin A1C blood test we mentioned measures glycation damage to the red blood cells caused by glucose spikes. So it's a surrogate measure for relative blood glucose levels over a period of time, about 90 days. So glucose protects. I mean, insulin protects us from these glucose spikes. But on the other hand, insulin itself has many functions. It drives cellular growth, and it's anabolic. There's insulin-like growth factor that's been associated with different types of diseases. High levels of insulin that are present in type 2 diabetics drive cardiovascular disease. They drive cancer. They drive Alzheimer's disease, is in some circles referred to as type 3 diabetes because of its association with disordered glucose and insulin metabolism. So it's really a challenge. We can't not have any insulin, but too much of it is harmful as well.
Now, one of the things I wanted to get into, you got into this when you were talking about statins, which I had a bad experience with, but I don't want to go there because people get mad when I tell them my story, because it isn't supposed to be that way. Is when pharmaceuticals, they are basically marketing channels. They're trying to sell you more of these drugs, and they want you to go to your doctor and ask for these drugs. And so I remember a commercial years ago. Have you tried the purple pill? Ask your doctor about the purple pill. And I'm like, how can you have a commercial and not even tell us, other than everybody's happy, what this purple pill does? But
Well,
they would.
there are only two countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise directly to patients their drugs. And the reason is because it's dangerous. It harms people when they do that. But the two countries that still allow it are the United States and New Zealand. And, politics aside, but this new administration that's coming in, for better or worse, one of the things they've talked about doing is outlawing pharmaceutical advertisements, which, I think, Democrats, Republicans, nobody's done it yet, since it should have been done 20 years ago. But they're talking about doing that. They would really dramatically change things because it's a corrupting influence, because money is paid to media through that, and patients get wrong information, and it's just bad for so many reasons. Anyway, I didn't want to.
Well, no. But this is exactly it, and it even gets like worse, because I could sit there and you could look at a drug and they can say, okay, from a relative perspective, this improves health outcomes by 50%. And you're like, oh, wow. And then but they don't tell you that, then when they start looking at the side effects, they now switch to absolute percentages. Can you talk a little? I was an auditor, like I said, so I kind of geek out on math. And so I actually read a book, I think it was in the 80s, called Statistics and Damn Lies or something like that. I think at least understanding that some of the things you hear, even in the media, are really just marketing messages.
Yeah, what you're referring to is the so-called statistical alchemy that's used by pharmaceutical manufacturers and other types of advertisers. But the particular case we talk about in the book is something with statins, which is almost a whole chapter in itself. But basically, statins are one of the most heavily prescribed drugs in the world. They're prescribed. Their effect is to lower blood LDL cholesterol. They have effects on blood lipids, essentially, and it's believed by large numbers in the medical community for the last 60 years that blood LDL cholesterol is causative in heart attacks. So the idea, well, if I have a drug to lower this blood level of blood fat, it will lower my risk of heart attacks. And sure enough, statins will lower your risk of heart attacks. In very large studies, if you look at the patients who don't take statins, maybe let's do an example, 3% will have heart attacks. But if you give people statins, 1.5% of those will have heart attacks. So what is that? It's going from 3% to 1.5%. And to your point, that's a relative risk reduction of, in this example, is 50%, but with statins, it's about 30%. And that's what's publicized. And doctors and patients repeat this. They go, wow, I'm going to reduce my chance of a heart attack by 30% by taking a statin. Well, actually, no. That's the relative risk. The absolute risk, it's only 1.5% of the whole thing. So the absolute risk is much, much less. And when we talk about relative risk, it amplifies the benefits. And the problem with statins is, because you could make the argument, the number one cause of death for me and you and most of our listeners, statistically, is going to be one of these chronic diseases, right? Yeah. And the very top of the list, the number one cause is heart attack. And that's what we're talking about here. So if the number one killer is heart disease and you've got a drug that'll lower it by 1% for me, hey, I'll take that. It's like, why not? It's still, the problem is with statins, with any drug, there are side effects. And with statins, there are many side effects, muscle aches and pains, brain effects, depression, metabolic effects, type 2 diabetes, different things like this. But what these companies do is when they talk about the benefits, they use relative risk. When they talk about the side effects, they'll talk about the absolute effects. So they use the statistics, whichever most is favorable. But the really scary thing about statins is there have been a couple of interesting studies that are meta-analysis. They're studies of studies where they gather large numbers of patients. And they've looked at statin trials. And when you look at statin trials in very large numbers, sure enough, that people taking statins have a lower rate of death from heart attacks. No question. It's not a huge. It's 1 to 3%, but it's still there, right? But the interesting thing is, in these studies, several of them have shown now that although people who take statins have a lower risk of death from heart disease, when we look at something called all-cause mortality, which is their cause of death from everything, there's no difference. Wait a minute. What does that mean? It means that people, in these studies at least, people who died of heart attacks and had fewer heart attacks, the group on statins, they died at higher rates from other things.
They're all daredevil bicyclists. They're doing crazy
that's
stuff.
Exactly right. Yeah. They died of things like traffic accidents, suicides, things because cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, is what our brain is made up of. So it's involved in the brain. It's involved with our hormones. There are many hormones that use cholesterol as foundational. It's this cell membrane. So it's, when we start screwing around with blood levels of cholesterol and lowering them with this powerful drug statin, we may decrease the rate of heart attacks, but there are these unintended consequences, at least in some of these studies, that indicate that something else is going on with side effects and other systems as well.
Yeah. Now, again, the interesting thing here is just the way they're going to present this information. It makes it very hard for a consumer to know. And then doctors are taught, okay, this is, again, pill, problem, pill. But again, there's nothing inherently wrong with cholesterol. We need cholesterol. It serves a purpose, like I said, beyond being the backbone for hormones, part of our brain, a part of all. 60% of our brain is fat, and I don't mean that in a bad way. That's what the substance is. But if we were to stop the glycation, which is what's damaging the arteries in the first place, you wouldn't need the cholesterol to collect to basically shellac the problem. still goes back to the source, and the source
Yeah.
is excess
Yeah.
glycation.
Yeah, you're hitting on a great point. Is that no question, cholesterol is present in the lesions, in the damage to our blood vessels, and that was noted 120 years ago, and that was the basis. Well, if cholesterol is in the blood vessels, must be eating an egg, which is high in cholesterol, is clogging my blood vessels, but it doesn't quite work that way because one of the number one causes of heart attack is smoking. Smoking cigarettes and particulates in the bloodstream, which have nothing to do with cholesterol, yet they still get the plaques with cholesterol. So these and so there's a lot of things that don't make sense. Most people, when they come in for a heart attack, have a normal cholesterol, so they
Yeah.
don't have elevated cholesterol. There's all sorts of kind of red flags, and my message, I think the way I think of it is that the high risk drivers for heart disease, LDL cholesterol is low risk, low hazard ratio. It's still a risk factor, but much more important are things like smoking, things like insulin resistance, things like metabolic disease, diabetes, all these other factors. What does that mean? It means, I think, you're more likely to damage your heart and increase your risk of heart disease by eating a donut, which is high in sugar and carbohydrates, than you are in eating a steak, which is high in fats.
A way I heard it, I said one time, and this has really stuck with me, is that you could sit there and say, have you ever noticed how at a fire there's a bunch of firemen? So if we reduce the number of firemen, we would have fewer fires. And anyone could look at that and say that's fundamentally ridiculous. But it's sort of the way they're blaming cholesterol for being on the scene of injury to the arteries and therefore causing a heart attack. And yes, the plaques are going to be made out of cholesterol because that's what cholesterol does. But again, it's like blaming the firefighters for the fire. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't some pyromaniacs that become firefighters, but they're not the ones that are usually responsible for starting the fire. I want to talk a little bit about aging and longevity because the myth you talked about in there, the lie, if you will, was that we're just wearing out. That's why we get old and we age and we die. Is that this is a wear and tear thing? It does talk about I guess in a little bit it's talking about the reactive species and just the breakdown of our bodies and our cells, but you also kind of see this aging as a metabolic disease in a sense.
Yeah, and the second to the last chapter of the book, the penultimate chapter, is on aging and on longevity and aging. And I didn't start out to write a book about aging, but I realized that adopting a metabolically healthy lifestyle that will reduce our chances of all these chronic diseases, what's the effect of that? Well, you push these chronic diseases later, you live longer, so increasing our longevity. So that sort of dove into longevity, and the one lie that, or the accepted belief of longevity and aging is that we age because we wear out. In other words, hey, my shirt wears out, my car wears out, my shoes wear out, everything wears out. So why wouldn't we wear out? And it's a great model for aging, except it's not quite right. Now, there are aspects of aging where we do wear out, but if you think about it, human living cells or living cells are not my shoes or other things. And in fact, the human germ cell line does not age. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. In other words, the cells that go on from the parents to the child and on and on and on do not age. So there are certain exceptions to it. There's some animals that live, crazy long lives, hundreds of years for, Greenland sharks. And there's even a jellyfish that's called the immortal jellyfish because it never dies unless it's eaten or something. But the animal itself lives indefinitely. So I talk about it in the chapter to introduce concepts that it's not just wearing out. They're actually programmed things that cause aging. And what does that mean? Well, if there's a program for aging, then it's possible to change the program, right? And that's I mean, as much as there's been a revolution in metabolic health and all our understanding of all these diseases, there's almost an even bigger revolution in longevity now that is just rewriting our understanding of aging and what it is. I personally, I think we're going to see dramatic changes in aging. People are going to be living much, much longer, and it's going to be very exciting. It is very exciting, but it's going to have challenges of its own.
Yeah, I wanted to go into, you called it Tor. I've always read it as mTOR, but I wanted to go into that. I'm gonna hold that. I want you to get the book. If you want to understand how your metabolism works and how it's tied into all of this, this is the book. And if you are on the fence about changing your lifestyle and giving up the Krispy Kreme donuts, because those jellyfish don't eat Krispy Kreme donuts, that's why they live forever. If you're interested in that kind of thing, it's like this will give you the backing. This will show you. And then at the end of the book, one of the last chapter, I think was the last chapter, you actually talk about the lifestyle interventions that we can implement very easily into our lives, which you've done to reverse disease. And so I just think this is a wonderful book, by far my favorite book for 2025. And I think it'll stay on the top for a long, long time, because it's an excellent book. If you're interested in understanding human body, understanding metabolism, very well done. Thank you, Robert, or Dr. Lufkin, I'm sorry. Either way, thank you so much. This was a wonderful book. I only have one more question for you. I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are 3 strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
Wow, that's well. First of all, it's even though I'm a doctor, I realize that doctors don't make me healthy. When I go to a doctor, I go to a doctor to get less sick. And being healthy is something that is in my control. So it's when I wake up in the morning, I get to choose how I live every single day, when I eat, what I eat, when I exercise, when I sleep. I think it's very empowering. So choosing lifestyle, choosing each one of those things is something we get to do. And in my opinion, that's the greatest medicine most of us will ever experience, is the lifestyle that we deliver to ourselves every single day. It's more powerful than anything any of the doctors will give us. And that's sort of the take-home message of this book.
Yeah. Like I said, I love the book. Thank you so much for letting me profile that. And thank you for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness. If someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about the book, and I think you've got a bonus chapter for us.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing that information?
Sure, absolutely, Alan. On my website is robertlufkinmd.com, just my name and my degree. And you can download the free first chapter of the book in audio form or written form. See if you like it before you spend money or drive to the library, and see if you like the thing. I'm also active on social media. My wife says too active, but look for me and say hi if you're out there.
Will do. Thank you so much. And again, Doctor, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. This is fun.